thing I remember is the floor, cold tile against my cheek, the smell of candle wax and old wood, someone screaming my name. I didn't know whose voice it was at first. I found out later it was Dorothy, the woman who sits 3 pews behind me every Sunday, the one who always brings lemon pound cake to the potluck. I didn't even know she knew my name. I was 63 years old, and I was lying face down on the floor of Grace Fellowship Church, and I could not move my left arm. That's where this story starts. Not with my son. I'll get to him. I had been feeling off since Thursday, a tightness in my chest that I told myself was stress, because what else was I going to tell myself? I've been telling myself it was stress for 30 years. Stress when my husband left. Stress when I raised 2 kids alone on a teacher's salary. Stress when I watched my savings shrink, and my knees get worse and my hair go from brown to the silver it is now. Stress is just the word I use when I don't want to admit that something is actually wrong. Sunday morning I got up, made coffee, put on the blue dress I always wear to church because it has pockets, and drove myself to Grace Fellowship like I do every single week. I sang the hymns. I shook hands during the greeting. I bowed my head when Pastor Dale asked us to pray for the Hensley family, who just lost their youngest to a car accident. I don't remember much after that. A sharp pull under my collarbone, my knees going soft, and then the floor. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, and the first face I saw was a nurse named Terry who had a butterfly tattoo on her wrist in the most efficient manner I had ever encountered. She told me I'd had a cardiac event. That was the phrase she used, a cardiac event, like it was something on a calendar, and that I was stable, and that the doctor would come speak to me shortly. I nodded. I looked around the room. The chair by the window was empty. I told myself my son was probably parking. You know how hospital parking garages are? He's probably on his way up right now. He probably got the call and dropped everything and drove straight here and is just, at this very moment, looking for a space on the 3rd level. That's what I told myself. The doctor came. His name was Dr. Abrams, a quiet man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He explained what had happened, a blockage. Caught early enough, I was lucky. I would need monitoring. I would need rest. I would need to make some changes. He asked if I had any family who could be reached. I said yes. My son. He knows. Dr. Abrams nodded in that careful way doctors do when they already know more than you do. He said they've been trying to reach him. They continue trying. I didn't ask how many times they'd called. I found that out later. 31 times over 2 days. 31 calls to my son's cell phone from the hospital, with my name attached, and he did not answer a single one. My son's name is Dennis. He's 38 years old. He works in logistics, which means he manages shipping routes for a distribution company 3 states away. He has a good salary. He has a nice apartment. He has a girlfriend named Stacy who I've met twice, both times at Christmas, both times while she looked at her phone. Dennis and I have always had a complicated relationship. I know parents aren't supposed to say that about their children. We're supposed to say we're close, we're supposed to post photos on Facebook and write happy birthday in the comments, and pretend that everything is warmly uncomplicated. But the truth is, somewhere around the time Dennis turned 30, things shifted. He started returning my calls days later. He started being busy every time I suggested a visit. He started using a tone with me that I can only describe as impatient, like I was a task on his list that kept reappearing. I told myself it was the distance. I told myself it was Stacy. I told myself he was just busy and that's what adult children are like now, and that I needed to stop being so needy. I was very good at telling myself things. Day 2 in the hospital. Still no Dennis. My neighbor Ruth Ann came. She brought me a tote bag with crossword puzzles and chapstick, and a small container of her homemade chicken soup that she'd clearly driven home to make, and then driven back. She sat with me for 4 hours. She held my hand during the 2nd round of tests. She is 71 years old with bad hips, and she drove to the hospital twice in one day, and she is not even family. Pastor Dale stopped by with a card signed by half the congregation. Dorothy, the woman who screamed my name on the floor, came with flowers, yellow daisies, because she'd noticed I always wore yellow in the summer and she'd remembered. People I'd known for years showed up. People I'd made barely knew showed up. My son did not show up. On day 2, a young hospital social worker named Becca sat with me and gently asked if there was anyone else she could contact. A daughter, maybe? Another family member? She was trying to be kind. I could see her being kind through the careful blankness of her face. I said it was just Dennis. She nodded. She said they'd keep trying. I stared at the ceiling after she left, and I thought, he knows. Somewhere, he knows that phone is ringing, and he is choosing not to answer. That was when something in me went very quiet, not sad, not angry, quiet. The way a house goes quiet after the last person leaves and the door shuts, and it's just still. I was in the hospital for 4 days total. Dennis called on day 3. I had just finished lunch, hospital chicken, which tastes like the idea of chicken, when my phone buzzed. His name on the screen. After 31 missed calls from the hospital. After 2 days of silence. After I'd had a cardiac event on a church floor and woken up alone in a room that smelled like antiseptic and floor wax. His name on my screen. I put the phone face down on the tray table. I picked up my crossword book. I did not answer. I want to say it felt powerful. It didn't. Not exactly. It felt more like relief. Like finally doing the thing I should have done years ago, which was stop working so hard to be available to someone who treated my availability like it was owed to him. He called 3 more times that afternoon. I let them all go. Here's something I haven't told many people. 2 weeks before I ended up on that church floor, I had lunch with my daughter-in-law's cousin. Her name is Faye. She and I had met at a birthday party the previous spring and discovered we both loved bad television and strong tea, and we'd gotten into the habit of meeting at a diner near my house every few weeks. Faye is 35. She's bright and sharp and says exactly what she thinks, which I find refreshing in a world where everyone is always softening everything. At that lunch, she told me something I didn't want to hear. She said that Dennis had mentioned to her cousin Stacy that he was hoping I would sell my house and give him the money to put toward a down payment on a larger apartment. He'd apparently said something like, "She doesn't need all that space anymore." She hesitated before she told me. I could see her deciding whether to say it or stay quiet. I'm glad she said it. I drove home from that lunch and sat in my kitchen, in my house that I've lived in for 22 years, the house I scraped and saved and refinanced twice to keep, and I thought about my son deciding what I needed. I thought about the calls I'd made that he'd taken days to return. I thought about the Christmas when I drove 6 hours to see him, and he'd had plans with his friends for most of the time I was there. I thought about all of the years I had swallowed my hurt and told myself it was fine. He was busy. That's just how things are now. I did not sell the house. But the thought started forming in the back of my mind, slow and quiet, like water finding its way through rock. I was discharged on a Thursday afternoon. Ruth Ann picked me up. She had cleaned my kitchen before she came, which made me cry in the car, which I think surprised both of us. She helped me settle in, made me tea, stayed until 8 o'clock. When she left, the house was quiet, and I sat in my reading chair by the window, and I did not turn on the television, and I did not look at my phone, and I just sat. Dennis had left 2 voicemails. I hadn't listened to them. I listened to them that night. The first one, "Mom, hey, I saw some missed calls. Everything okay? Call me back." That was it. No mention of the hospital. No mention of 31 calls over 2 days. Everything okay? Like he'd missed a casual check-in. The second one, from about 4 hours later, had a slightly different tone. "Mom, I'm getting kind of worried. I talked to Stacy's cousin, and she said something about you being in the hospital. Can you call me? I'm kind of in the middle of something, but call me when you can." Kind of in the middle of something. I set my phone down. I did not call him back. 3 days after I got home, Faye came by. She brought groceries. Real groceries. Vegetables and bread, and a rotisserie chicken and a bar of the dark chocolate I'd mentioned months ago that I liked. She put everything away in the right cabinets, which told me she'd been paying attention. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Dennis finally figured out you were in the hospital." I said I'd gathered as much. She said, "He's been telling people you're not returning his calls and acting like you're the one being unreasonable." I wrapped my hands around my tea mug. Of course he is. Faye looked at me steadily. She has that quality, where she looks at you like she's deciding to be honest with you, every time, as a choice she keeps making. "What are you going to do?" I thought about that for a long moment. "I'm going to get better," I said, "and then I'm going to figure out the rest." This is what Dennis didn't know. 8 months before all of this, I had sold the rental property I'd held for 12 years. A small duplex I'd bought in my 50s as a retirement safety net, the one Dennis had never once asked about or helped with, even when the roof needed replacing, and I was managing contractors while also still working full-time. I had sold it. And I had the money, just over $90,000, sitting in an account Dennis did not know existed. He had been asking, gently at first, then with more frequency, about my finances. Was I comfortable? Did I have enough? Maybe I should think about downsizing, selling the house, something smaller, something easier. He framed it as concern. I had let him frame it as concern, because it was easier than examining what was underneath. I had a meeting scheduled with my financial advisor. A careful, steady man named Walter who had managed my accounts for 11 years, for 2 weeks after I got home from the hospital. I kept the meeting. I sat across from Walter and I told him what had happened. All of it. The hospital. The 31 calls. The voicemails. Faye's information about the down payment conversation. Walter is not an emotional man. He does not offer hugs or warm speeches. What he did was fold his hands on his desk and say, very plainly, "What do you want the next chapter to look like?" Nobody had asked me that in a long time. I thought about it. I said, I want to travel. I've been saying I'll do it later for 15 years. I want to go to Portugal. I want to take the train through Scotland. I want to see Nova Scotia in the fall. Walter nodded. He said we could make that work, if I was thoughtful about it. I said, I want to update my estate documents. I said the rest of it plainly, without drama, because it wasn't drama. It was just a decision. I want Dennis's inheritance reduced to the legal minimum. I want the remainder to go to causes that actually mattered to me. Walter didn't blink. He gave me the name of an estate attorney he trusted. He said it was a reasonable and common decision for someone in my situation. I signed the paperwork 2 weeks later. My hands were steady the whole time. Dennis showed up at my door on a Saturday in November, 6 weeks after the hospital. He had driven 7 hours. He had not called ahead. I opened the door and there he was. And for just a second, just one, I felt the old pull. The one that makes you want to step back and make room and say, come in, it's fine, everything's fine, I'm just glad you're here. That pull that mothers feel, I think. That's been trained into us over decades. I let it pass. It took maybe 3 seconds. I said, Dennis. He said, Mom, I've been trying to reach you. You haven't returned any of my calls. I said, I know. He looked confused. He'd expected. I could see it on his face. He'd expected the door to open wider, for me to be relieved to see him, for things to go back to the way they'd been, where I was grateful for whatever attention I received. Can I come in? He asked. I thought about the hospital floor, the cold tile against my cheek, the empty chair by the window, Dorothy's yellow daisies, Ruth Ann's clean kitchen, Faye's groceries, Walter's question, what do you want the next chapter to look like? Not today, I said, and I closed the door. Quietly, without slamming it, without theatrics, just closed it. I stood in my hallway for a moment, listening to the silence of my own house. Then I went to my reading chair, picked up the travel memoir I'd been working through, and found my page. I left for Lisbon 6 weeks later. Ruth Ann drove me to the airport at 5 a.m. without being asked, because I'd mentioned the date once and she'd put it in her calendar. Faye texted me a list of restaurants she'd found in a travel forum, with notes about which ones had quiet corners and which ones had the best custard tarts. The flight was 9 hours. I had a window seat. I watched the Atlantic go dark below me as we crossed the time zones, and I thought about all the years I'd spent making myself smaller so that Dennis could feel comfortable, all the calls I'd made that he'd let go to voicemail, all the visits I'd quietly given up on, all the times I'd swallowed the question of whether I actually mattered to him. I thought about the morning on the church floor, the cold tile and the candle wax smell, and Dorothy's voice. The way your life narrows to a single point when your body decides it has had enough. And then I thought about the custard tarts. I was still thinking about the custard tarts when we began our descent into Lisbon, and the city appeared below me in the early morning light, all terracotta and gold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like myself. Dennis has not stopped reaching out. There have been calls, texts, one letter, an actual handwritten letter, which surprised me, in which he said he was hurt and confused and that he felt like I'd changed. He's right. I have changed. I wrote back, once, because I'm not someone who believes in permanent silence as a statement. I said I love you. I will always love you. But love has to move in both directions, and for a very long time it has mostly been moving in one. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done rearranging myself to make room for someone who is never going to make room for me. I told him the door was open if he ever wanted to have an honest conversation. I told him I hoped he was well. I haven't heard back. I'm writing this from a small hotel in Porto where I've been for 3 days. My room has a blue-tiled balcony and a view of the river, and every morning I sit out there with terrible hotel coffee and a pastry I buy from the bakery on the corner, and I watch the city wake up. I am 63 years old. I had a cardiac event on a church floor. My son did not answer 31 calls. And I am fine. More than fine. Ruth Ann is coming to meet me in Scotland next month. Faye is talking about flying out to join us in Nova Scotia in the fall. Pastor Dale sends me a weekly check-in text, which I think began as a pastoral duty and has turned to genuine friendship. I have $90,000 that my son does not know about and will not inherit. I have a reading chair that no one else sits in, a kitchen that Ruth Ann cleaned when I needed it most, and a balcony in Porto where the river catches the light at 7 in the morning in a way that makes me understand, finally, why people use the word breathtaking. I spent 30 years making myself available to people who treated that availability like it cost nothing. I'm spending whatever years I have left the other way around. The phone is right here. It's just that I decide now who I answer. I used to think love was something you proved by staying, by not leaving when it was hard, by calling back even when you didn't feel like it, by showing up even when you were tired, by making yourself available even when no one asked how you were doing. I stayed for a long time, longer than I should have. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from a therapist, though I've read plenty of books and sat across from a few therapists, is that how people behave in the moments that cost them something is the truest information you will ever have about them. Not what they say when things are easy. Not the Christmas texts or the birthday calls that come a day late. What they do when showing up requires something real from them. Time, inconvenience, the simple act of picking up a phone. Dennis showed me exactly who he was when that phone rang 31 times. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a while. In the car, alone, driving home from the hospital, gripping the steering wheel too tight. That's allowed. You're allowed to be furious when someone you raised, someone you scraped and sacrificed for, treats your emergency like background noise. But bitterness is a place to pass through, not a place to live. What replaced it, slowly, was something I can only call clarity. I started to see that I had made it very easy for Dennis to take me for granted. Not because I was weak. I don't believe that anymore. But because I had been taught, the way a lot of women my age were taught, that a good mother makes herself easy to overlook. That you absorb the hurt quietly. That you don't make demands. That you stay grateful for whatever scraps of attention you receive, and you do not, under any circumstances, ask for more. I had been following that script for decades, and it had gotten me a chair by the window that stayed empty. Faye didn't follow that script. She told me the truth about the down payment conversation when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Ruth Ann didn't follow it either. She just showed up, cleaned my kitchen, drove into the airport at 5 in the morning, put it in her calendar. Nobody taught them to do that. They just did it, because that's what it looks like when someone actually sees you. That's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story. Not that your family is beyond hope. Not that you should cut everyone off and move to Portugal, although Portugal is genuinely wonderful. But this, the way someone treats your need, is data. It is honest, reliable, unspinnable data about where you actually rank in their life. And you are more than allowed to make decisions based on that data. I changed my will. I kept my money. I booked the flight. None of those things were acts of revenge. They were acts of self-respect, which is a quieter thing and a more durable one. I am 63 years old. I have a balcony in Porto and a neighbor who cleans my kitchen, and a friend who sends restaurant lists with notes about the best custard tarts. I have more ahead of me than I let myself believe for a very long time. The phone still rings sometimes. I still decide who I answer. That's not cruelty. That's just finally understanding that my time, my attention, and my presence have always been worth something. I just stopped giving them away to people who didn't know that.